All right, so you just alluded to the idea that this certainly isn't a new development, the idea that the U.S. has been involved in regime change operations in Iran. I wonder if you could speak to a little bit of that history, but specifically what the goals are and why we're seeing escalation with Iran at this particular moment.
Well, when it comes to Iran, Iran has been the number one target of Israel for 30 years, from the moment that Netanyahu first became prime minister of Israel 30 years ago. He has had his eyes set on toppling the Iranian government. The Iranian government supports the Palestinian cause. It has actively supported the Palestinian cause. It has backed Hamas at times. It has backed Hezbollah. It doesn't do exactly what Netanyahu says in the most nefarious ways, but it has absolutely stood with the Palestinians against an Israeli government that is intent on obliterating any idea of a state of Palestine. And so Netanyahu 30 years ago uh, came to power with the idea that there would be a greater Israel, so-called, ruling over the Palestinian people, blocking anything even remotely resembling a Palestinian state. And Netanyahu and his advisors said already 30 years ago in a document called Clean Break that this maximalist policy, they didn't characterize it like that, I do, but the policy of Greater Israel would lead to Palestinian resistance. And that Palestinian resistance would be supported by countries in the Middle East. And that what Israel's policy should be is to attack and bring down any government in the Middle East that supports the Palestinian cause. And we've been through nonstop war because another part of the clean break is that the United States should do the dirty dealing in all of this. Israel will fight some of the time, but the United States basically should fight all of the time. It should fund these overthrow operations. It should fund the destabilization. It should fund the wars as necessary. So Netanyahu's been championing many wars in the Middle East, basically targeting governments in the Middle East that support the Palestinian cause. And famously, in 2001, we first heard of the list of 7 desired wars in 5 years, which was a list that the U.S. government supposedly concocted in order to basically fight Israel's wars. And that list included Syria, uh, Iraq, Iran, uh, Lebanon, Sudan, Somalia, and Libya.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years." starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
So the idea was you have to take out any governments that support the Palestinian cause. And the United States has been suckered or bribed or blackmailed or something into that business for the last quarter century. And think about how many wars the United States has fought or imbroglios that the United States has gotten into at this maximalist Israeli behest. The Iraq War. People should go to YouTube and watch Netanyahu in the fall of 2002 saying how glorious a war in Iraq would be and how it would change the Middle East. And in fact, he promised in the fall of 2002, you attack and bring down Saddam Hussein, saying the young people of Iran are going to watch that and they're going to do the same regime change.
If you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone. There is a new age, something new is happening.
And that is speculation on your part, or you have some evidence to that effect?
You know, I was asked the same question in 1986. I had written a book in which I had said that the way to deal with terrorist regimes, well, with terror, was to deal with the terrorist regimes. And the way to deal with the terrorist regimes, among other things, was to apply military force against them.
The way we did in Afghanistan.
The way, for example, I want to answer your question.
Well, I guess I'm running out of time, so I quickly was trying to get there. We've done, I think, what you proposed in Afghanistan, yet I haven't seen that sort of neighborhood effect.
Well, I think there's been an enormous effect. The effect was, we were told that there would be a contrary effect. First of all, people said that there would be tens of thousands of people streaming into Afghanistan, zealots who would be outraged by America's action, and this would produce a counter-reaction in the Arab world.
But I think you're not saying that when you take an action like we did in Afghanistan, we're going to see all the other countries just fold.
No, what we saw is something else. First of all, we saw everybody streaming out of Afghanistan. The second thing we saw is all the Arab countries and many Muslim countries trying to side with America, trying to be okay with America. The application of power is the most important thing in winning the war on terrorism. If I had to say, what are the three principles of winning the war on terror? It's like, what are the three principles of real estate, the three L's, location, location, location? The three principles of winning the war on terror are the three W's, winning, winning, and winning. The more victories you amass, the easier the next victory becomes. The first victory in Afghanistan makes the second victory in Iraq that much easier. The second victory in Iraq will make the third victory that much easier too, but it may change the nature of achieving that victory. It may be possible to have implosions taking place. I don't guarantee it, Mr. Turney, but I think it makes it more likely.
And then the story was, well, Iran is the mastermind, so that has to be brought down. So the notion took hold in 2011 that the government of Syria, of Bashar al-Assad, needed to be overthrown. And good old Barack Obama signed a CIA presidential finding, it's called. It came to be known as Operation Timber Sycamore. That was completely instigated by the United States. Of course, it was called an insurrection. It was called a rebellion against the brutal regime of Bashar al-Assad. But what it was a regime change operation. In the fall of that same year, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama decided that they would bomb Libya to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, another country on the list. They did that. It's been basically 15 years of civil war since then, with enormous repercussions all over the Middle East and actually Africa as well. So this is the modus operandi of the U.S.-Israel policy in the region. The Israeli policy is crush the Palestinian cause. We've just been through a genocide in Gaza towards that end. But Netanyahu recognized, and he wrote about it in his own books, as well as that clean break strategy that I mentioned from 30 years ago, which was written with his political advisors, that it wouldn't pay simply to go, quote, simply to go after Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis. You have to go after the ones that back these resistance efforts. And that has been Iran all along. So there has been a targeted campaign against Iran to try to bring down the Iranian regime one way or another for decades, in fact, even before Netanyahu showed up on the scene. To really understand the Iranian story, you actually have to go back 72 years, almost 73 years now, to the overthrow of a democratically elected prime minister of Iran, Mossadegh, by the CIA and MI6, the United States and Britain, back in 1953. That one wasn't about Israel. That was just to grab Iran's oil. Mossadegh had said that the oil, shockingly, belonged to the Iranian people. And that was absolutely too much for the British and the United States, who knew, just like Trump knows about Venezuelan oil, that it obviously belongs to the United States. So they overthrew the government, installed the Shah of Iran, which is very often characterized as a police state that lasted until 1979, so for decades. Interestingly, bizarrely, it is the son of the Shah who is the big promoter of regime change right now. He's cheering on the sidelines, telling Trump, you must go and support the protesters and so on. Well, in 1979, the Shah, who was ailing with cancer, was toppled, and the Iranian government now came into power with the Ayatollah Khomeini taking power in a revolution in 1979. And almost immediately, the United States tried to overthrow that new government. The reason, in part, was the Iranian students were so furious with having lived under a U.S. imposed police state and then having taken in the Shah for medical treatment in 1979 that they grabbed the American hostages, and the hostage taking became the absolute cause célèbre of 1980, beyond anything imaginable. It crowded out everything. It created an environment of hate, and it led the United States to arm Iraq, the next door neighbor, to fight against Iran for many years, with hundreds of thousands of people being killed in Iran. So another very bloody episode of the U.S., all brushed aside, never talked about, never discussed, never analyzed, never understood. No history ever counts for the American security state. You do what you want, you do it with impunity. There's never a review, and there's never accountability. Well, suffice it to say, this put the U.S. And Iran on a bad track. And when the extremists in Israel started to take power consistently in the mid-1990s with Netanyahu's rise to the prime ministership, Iran was the common target of Israel and the U.S. But I would say it was the idée fixe of Netanyahu, and has been for 30 years. Almost any time he speaks, he is saying that the root of all evil in the world is Iran. Partly it is to deflect any question about a maximalist Israeli state that wants to rule over or dispossess or kill in large numbers the Palestinian people. But suffice it to say, Iran has been in the bullseye for a long time. There have been repeated operations. I talked about the 80s, where Iraq was funded to fight Iran. But basically, from the 1990s onward, the U.S. has used various kinds of economic warfare and covert operations, assassinations. Mossad, of course, uses assassinations to weaken and attempt to topple the Iranian regime. And a standard playbook of regime change by the United States is to squeeze the economy to the point of collapse and either thereby directly leading to a fall of a government or leading to unrest, which is then stoked by the United States. And often the idea actually is bring about a crackdown by the government to the point where it loses legitimacy or where the U.S. then intervenes. It's a very standard playbook. It sometimes goes by the name of color revolutions. It is an explanation of how the neutral government of Ukraine was toppled with a big push by the U.S. in February 2014, thereby causing the Ukraine war. Another one of these events that is never discussed or analyzed properly by the mainstream media, and certainly never by a congressional committee or, God forbid, by the U.S. government telling the truth about anything. But the point is that this has been the way that many governments have been overthrown. Interestingly, in Venezuela, same actions. The U.S. tried to create a major squeeze in the Venezuelan economy at several times. And the way that this was done in both cases was comprehensive economic sanctions, saying you can't trade with Iran, of course not the United States, but anyone else that trades with Iran is afoul of U.S. demands. And we will punish anyone that trades with Iran, so-called secondary sanctions. And this was applied vis-a-vis Venezuela and applied vis-a-vis Iran. It hurt like hell in both places. People who have studied this show that infant mortality rates rise, life expectancy falls. In other words, it's not a little Band-Aid. It is a crushing blow to these economies. And the idea is that it will eventually topple the regimes. In the case of Venezuela, this was done comprehensively by Trump. It did not topple the regime, even though the collapse of living standards was absolutely ferocious. And then our mainstream blames that on the mismanagement and corruption of the regime, never pointing to the absolute most obvious, blatant fact that it's the U.S. business to destroy these economies. Well, it didn't work.
The intrinsic failures of socialism.
Yeah, it didn't work in Venezuela, so they went in and kidnapped the president and put on a quarantine, and we're in the midst of that drama. But at the same time, Trump has been exercising so-called maximum pressure against Iran. It didn't work in the first year, so Netanyahu talked Trump into bombing a bombing campaign against Iran. There was the so-called 12-day war, just a brutal aggression by the United States. That went along with a number of assassinations of senior scientists and officials by Mossad in particular. That also didn't bring down the regime. And so in the fall, Trump intensified the squeeze, basically intensifying the threats to anybody doing business with Iran. The currency cratered at the end of the year when a foreign currency collapses, depreciates dramatically, that suddenly spikes the prices of goods because you pay a euro or a dollar price times a depreciated exchange rate. So in reals, in the Iranian currency, the prices soar. That did bring people out on the streets, but probably with a lot of help as well by Mossad, the CIA. We don't know all the information.
Well, probably. In some ways, this is so alarming because of how explicit some of this has been. The Jerusalem Post, I'm reading their reporting, Mossad spurs Iran protests as agents with demonstrators and Farsi message. As protests go across Iran, the Mossad posted an unusual Farsi message urging demonstrators to act, saying it is with them in the streets, amid rising economic pressure. Mike Pompeo posts Happy New Year to Iranians and Mossad agents beside them.
Yes.
In a social media post.
And by the way,
tweeting it out.
A tweet like that shows the giddiness of power, of complete lawless power of this small group in the U.S. that is in the business of trying to topple other governments. They don't hide it anymore. They gloat at it. They boast about it. So we've reached a kind of level of thuggery that I don't recall. The U.S. has been thuggish for a long time, and it's done a lot of regime change operations and wars, so that's nothing new. But at least, maybe it's strange to say, but at least they tried to hide it before. Now they just gloat. Because it's all a game to them.
Yeah.
And the game is fun, it seems, to call out or wave to the Mossad agents running in the streets of Tehran. It's despicable. We used to have some restraint, not very much, I admit. We have international law which says all of this is absolutely outrageous and contrary to the UN Charter, which, sorry to be a little naive, but it actually is the law of the land of the United States. It is a ratified treaty that goes back to 1945. In fact, a charter the United States largely wrote, and it is the law of the land that we should respect the UN Charter. And the UN Charter says in Article 2, Section 4, you cannot attack another sovereign country except in self-defense. You cannot threaten another country, its territorial integrity or its operations, except in self-defense, which is Article 51 of the UN Charter. So Trump has said, I'm not bound by any of that. I'm only bound by my own morality. We're in a phase in the last weeks, which is really something we haven't seen. A president that disdains the Constitution, disdains international law, makes no bones about it, threatens a half dozen countries, usually pretty much by the hour. And this is somehow taken as normal.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.